Welcome to the deep dive. And our source material today is, well, it's dense.
It is.
It's precise, and it's, I think, utterly revolutionary. We're plunging headfirst into the core argument of Maurice Merleau-Ponty's phenomenology of perception.
That's absolutely the mission. Our listener, the learner, sent us a selection that focuses really intensely on the problem of the body. And this isn't, abstract philosophy for dusty shelves.
Yeah.
It's more like a surgical operation on the entire Western intellectual tradition. The goal is to replace this sterile, mechanical view of the human body with the concept of the lived body.
And our goal today is to really perform a rigorous philosophical reconstruction of that. We're going to move slowly, go through his logic, define the key terms.
Right. And the hope is that by the end of this, you see your own hands, your own movements, even your relationship to gravity in a totally new light.
We are tackling the fundamental rift that has just plagued Western thought for centuries, which is that rigid separation of mind and body.
The goats in the machine.
The ghost in the machine, exactly. And if you're someone who encounters the modern world through medicine or psychology or just daily life, and you feel like your body is treated like a machine while your actual experience is ignored, Merleau-Ponty is your guide.
Yeah. We're moving away from the idea of simply having a body as if it's some object we own.
And moving toward the idea of being a body, a consciousness that is totally immersed, fully expressive, and grounded in the world.
And just to set the context here, the dilemma he's really trying to resolve is how we reconcile the objective world, the world that seems solid, external, independent of us, with the fact that it only ever appears to us.
So how can there be in itself this objective reality if it only exists for us, the perceiving subject?
That's the middle.
Okay, let's unpack this. So to start this reconstruction, we need the foundation. What is the single precise executive thesis that summarizes Merleau-Ponty's core argument in the source material we're working with?
The thesis is this. The human body evades description as a purely objective entity, a res extensa, because it is the fundamental vehicle of our existence.
The vehicle, right.
Grounding all perception, all motility, all meaning in an ambiguous being in the world that precedes any kind of intellectual thought.
That is a dense claim, but it tells us immediately that the body isn't an instrument of consciousness or a passive container for it.
No, not at all.
It's the very ground from which consciousness springs and operates.
Precisely. And the historical importance of this is that it's a direct confrontation with the problem created by Cartesian dualism. Descartes, he cleaved reality into two substances.
The body is a machine, the res extensa, and the mind is pure thought, the cogitatio.
Exactly. Non-conscious, mechanical, spatial body versus non-spatial, pure thought.
And that separation really defined scientific inquiry for centuries, didn't it? Doctors saw the body as a kind of hydraulic system. Psychologists saw the mind as this abstract logical process.
But Merleau-Ponty's whole point is that this division fundamentally fails to account for one key thing.
The lived experience.
The lived experience. It fails because in trying to be purely objective, it annihilates the very possibility of perception. And this brings us to his critique of what he calls objective thought.
Okay, so what is that exactly?
Objective thought is the mindset of science and, frankly, common sense. It's the search for a perspective that is valid everywhere, for everyone. A universal, perspectiveless viewpoint.
It's that idea of describing the house from nowhere, a sort of God's eye view.
That's the perfect phrase for it. It attempts to describe the house seen from nowhere, positing objects that are singular and identical and unchanging no matter where you are. But the flaw, as he points out, is that this neutral standpoint forces objective thought to lose all contact with the messiness of actual perceptual experience.
It becomes an intellectual project that isn't really about reality as we live it anymore.
Right. And this is where his critique gets so memorable. He uses this rhetorical question that just absolutely skewers the entire dualist assumption.
I love this part.
He asks, is not to see always to see from somewhere? To say that the house itself is seen from nowhere is surely to say that it is invisible.
And that is a philosophical punch to the gut. It really is. Because if perception requires a position, a perspective, if it has to be from somewhere, then the whole goal of objective thought becomes self-defeating.
It becomes a paradox. In its attempt to explain all appearances from a non-perspectival truth, it makes the fundamental fact of appearance impossible. It renders the world invisible.
So in essence, the whole dualistic tradition and the mechanistic science that came from it, they basically just congealed reality. They replaced the dynamic, living, perceiving body with this crystallized, dead system of external parts.
And that solidification is exactly what Merleau-Ponty wants to undo. The goal of his project isn't to reject objectivity entirely.
No.
It's to reestablish it on a new footing. He wants to discover the origin of the object at the very center of our experience. We have to understand how, starting from our own embodied, situated perspective, we can still arrive at a shared objective world.
We have to trace the threads that connect the body to its surroundings. And this is where the rigorous logic really kicks in. The genius of Merleau-Ponty, I think, isn't just that he describes the lived body. It's that he uses the failure of objective science to prove his own point. He builds this watertight case for why the traditional view just doesn't work.
Exactly. Let's break down that logic, piece by piece, starting with the premise he's attacking.
All right.
We begin by defining the mechanistic paradigm, which we can call premise 1. This gives us the context for what the body is supposed to be, according to that tradition.
So P1.
P1 states that objective thought insists that any entity inserted into the universe of objects must exist parts exteriores, parts external to parts, and it only acknowledges external mechanical relationships.
So the body, under this view, is just a closed reactive system.
A circuit board.
Right. It's the historical necessity of the Cartesian project. If the body is just matter, its function has to be reducible to linear causality. Stimulus A hits receptor B, causes response C. Simple.
And the immediate challenge to this comes from modern physiology itself. Merleau-Ponty argues that physiology, far from supporting this simple machine model, actually undermines it right away.
How so?
Well, if the body were just a collection of separate external parts, then an injury should just destroy a specific, ready-made sensory content.
Right, like removing a single gear from a clock or unplugging one light on a string. You lose that specific function, but the rest of the system stays perfectly intact.
That's the mechanistic expectation. But the evidence from sensory decay, especially from visual loss due to injury, shows something completely different. When you study how color sensitivity decays, you don't find that the patient loses the ability to see red while blue and green are still perfect.
It's not like the individual colors are being knocked out one by one.
No, the loss is total and structural. Merleau-Ponty notes that it manifests as a loss of differentiation in the function. All the colors are affected. The spectrum simplifies, saturation decreases across the board, and eventually you might just see in monochrome.
So the lesion doesn't destroy a pre-packaged color content. It impairs the entire active system that's responsible for structuring that experience in the first place.
Exactly. Think of it this way. If the mechanistic view, P1, were true, damaging the nervous system would be like someone taking a complex color photo and just selectively erasing all the red pixels. The blue and green pixels would still be perfectly distinct.
But that's not what happens.
No, the physiological reality is more like taking that same photo and gradually turning down the overall saturation and contrast on the monitor. The whole image becomes fuzzier, less distinct, simpler across the entire spectrum.
So it's the system's capacity to actively differentiate, to pattern the stimulus that's damaged, not just a specific input channel.
Exactly. And that recognition of the body as an active structural system rather than a passive recipient of data leads us directly to the next critical premise.
Okay, so P2.
P2 asserts that the body resists this objective treatment, as evidenced by phenomena that show its active role in shaping and even conceiving stimuli. The nervous system's essential function is active differentiation, which means an excitation is only perceived if the sensory organ is attuned to it.
So the body isn't just filtering data, it's anticipatorily engaging with the world. It's making decisions before conscious thought even starts.
The psychophysical event is not simple causality. It's not. To grasp this attunement, we have to move beyond the objectified corpse. Merleau-Ponty says that to understand the living body, we have to abandon the objective view and recognize the body which I experience at this moment.
My hand moving to grab a cup.
Right. The way your hand moves in anticipation of grasping an object isn't a mechanical circuit. It's the body anticipating the stimuli and itself tracing out the form which I'm about to perceive.
Okay, I follow the critique of mechanism in P1 and the idea that the body is an active patterning system in P2. But this next premise, P3, that the body is the source of objectification, that's where I think things get tricky.
It is. It's the core paradox.
It feels like we're creating this loop.
Yeah.
How can the body be both an object in the world and the necessary condition for seeing the world?
That is the essential ambiguity Merleau-Ponty is trying to capture. We absolutely need to slow down here and anchor this.
Okay, so P3.
P3 states, what resists objectification in the body, the perspective, the gaze, the active organizer, is fundamentally the means by which objects are constituted. It is that by which there are objects.
Okay, let's unpack that with most basic active perception. Touch. When I touch this table, the table is an object. It's res extensa. My hand is also an object,
Yeah.
physiologically. Where does the active subjectivity come in?
It comes in through the act of touching. Your hand, as the organ of touch, can't fully grasp itself as the thing that touches without turning into an inert object.
What do you mean?
Think about it. When your right hand touches your left hand, what happens? For a split second, the left hand is the passive object being touched. But almost immediately, it flips. It becomes the active subject touching back. The act of touching is inherently reversible.
Ah, I see. The body is the pivot point of the world because it's the only thing capable of this simultaneous subject-object reversal. The table can only ever be touched. The body is the only thing that can both touch and be touched, see and be seen at the same time.
And because of this reversible nature, your body establishes the constants of your world. The permanence of external objects is merely variations within a field of primordial presence that is established by your body. Your body is the unperceived constant at the center of your world. It gives you your coordinates.
I know that when I move, the world doesn't dissolve because my body is always present to sustain that coexistence.
Exactly. It's the ultimate blind spot. If you try to locate your body objectively, like a Cartesian mind looking down from above, you lose the very tool you used to locate it in the first place. The body that sees and touches can never be fully grasped as a thing without losing its essential function as the organ of existence.
It can't be fully objectified because it is the prerequisite for all objectification.
That is P3. And this pivot point is what dissolves the dualism. The body is both an object among others and the source of the subject's access to the world.
Which brings us to the conclusion of the logical chain.
See, therefore, the body is not merely one more object in the world, but the pivot of the world, revealing an ambiguous mode of existence, being in the world, that transcends the Cartesian split and affects the union of the psychic and the physiological.
So the union of mind and body isn't some incomprehensible meeting of two separate causalities, the ghost and the machine, but is enacted at every instant in the movement of existence.
Exactly. The body is the place where the psychic and physiological are unified, and that means we have to move away from the language of mechanical parts and toward the language of existential structure. But that means we need a new vocabulary.
Because the old words, mind, body, thought, they're all tainted by the dualism he just demolished.
He needed a new philosophical toolkit.
Okay, let's dive into that toolkit, because understanding this new language is the only way we can tackle his most compelling examples. So Merleau-Ponty uses familiar words in these really unfamiliar technical ways, and he also introduces entirely new concepts. This is where the density of the source material usually hits people pretty hard.
It really is.
So let's break down these 7 critical terms conversationally. We need to know not just what they mean, but why he needed to invent them in the first place.
Absolutely. And the reason we need these new words is exactly what we just covered in the logical reconstruction. The old language of Descartes just fails to account for the body as an active subject. Merleau-Ponty needed a language of existence.
Let's start with the dualistic terms he uses to frame the debate, even as he's rejecting them. First up, objective thought.
Objective thought. This is the mindset of common sense and science that posits singular, identical objects divorced from any perspective. It's the attempt to grasp the world from a universally detached viewpoint, which eliminates the subject's immediate situated experience. It is the search for the house seen from nowhere.
Okay. Next, the 2 Cartesian categories he's working against.
2. In itself, res extensa. This is existence characterized by external relationships, spatial and temporal individuation, and a total lack of consciousness. Think of inert matter, a rock, a crystal. It just exists, without reflection or meaning. 3. For itself, cogitatio. This is pure consciousness. It's characterized by self-knowledge, explicit thought, and these self-transparent meaning-giving acts. But Merleau-Ponty warns that if we define the self purely as this, it becomes a death of consciousness because it just floats above the world it's supposed to be perceiving.
It's disembodied, and the term that unifies these two, the core concept of the entire text, being in the world.
Being in the world, this is the pre-objective fundamental existence where the subject and the world are reciprocally implicated. They define each other. It's the common ground where the psychic and physiological are unified, and it happens prior to any intellectual distinction between stimulus and response.
It's the immediate lived contact with reality.
And it's always ambiguous because it's not me acting on the world, it's me being defined by my situation in the world.
Okay, so that concept then gets internalized when we talk about how we carry ourselves. Let's tackle the body image. Why can't we just call this muscle memory or, my inner map? What does schema corporal add that those common terms don't?
That is an excellent clarifying question. We can't use muscle memory because that sounds like a passive mechanical repetition that's just locked in the tissues.
And we can't use inner map because that sounds like an intellectual representation, a picture in my head.
Precisely. Merleau-Ponty's 5. Body image, schema corporal, is defined as a total dynamic awareness of one's posture and potential for action in the intersensory world. It's actively integrating your body parts based on the organism's projects.
So it's not a picture of my body. It's a constantly shifting awareness of my body's practical capabilities, what it can do right now.
Exactly. If I'm typing, my body image doesn't show me the location of my pinky finger bones. It shows me the capability of my whole hand to hit the P key. It's an open system of potential action that can integrate new tools and new environments. It's a dynamic structure that allows for immediate, unthinking action.
Which brings us to the type of knowledge that comes directly from that action. Practignosia.
6. Practignosia. This is knowledge that's inherent in the body's movement and action. It's a primary way of accessing the world that precedes objective thought. Think of the difference between knowing the theory of swimming versus actually knowing how to swim. The second one is practignosia.
Right. The sources mention reaching for a mosquito bite without objective localization. I don't calculate the coordinates of the bite on my arm. My body just knows the pathway to the itch.
It's knowledge baked into the motor project.
It's the body understanding space in relation to its needs.
And this is so critical because it shows that the body is intelligent in a way that is non-intellectual. It's a spontaneous response to a bodily need within a practical field.
Finally, we need to understand the relationship he posits between lower and higher functions. Fundierung. This one is notoriously tricky. It means foundation. But how is that different from cause?
Right. 7. Fundierung. Foundationsstiftung. This defines a non-causal relationship where one element serves as the ground or the indispensable matrix for a higher function to become incarnate. Let's use a non-philosophical analogy to explain the difference between cause and foundation.
Perfect.
Gasoline causes a car to move, in the sense that without it, the motion stops. The input precedes the output, but the engine itself is the foundation, the Fundierung, required for movement. You can have an engine without movement, but you cannot have controlled, self-propelled movement without that engine structure.
So the foundation is the indispensable matrix that's required for the higher function to even be constituted in the first place, even if it doesn't dictate the specific route or speed.
Exactly. So, sensory data like vision is the Fundierung for symbolic thought. Vision doesn't cause me to think about mathematics, but I can't do mathematics or even speak effectively if I don't have the foundation of sensory experience that establishes the field of objects and relations I'm talking about.
So the body is the Fundierung for consciousness.
Precisely. It allows consciousness to become embodied and situated, but it doesn't strictly cause or mechanically determine every single thought. With these 7 tools, we're now equipped to tackle the most compelling and dramatic examples of the lived body in action.
Okay, now we move to the core difficulty of Merleau-Ponty's argument, how the body stays fully committed to existence even when it's physiologically impaired. We selected a paragraph that deals with the most dramatic example of this, the phantom limb phenomenon.
The central insight of the phantom limb is that our existence is fundamentally ambiguous. Merleau-Ponty writes, "This paradox is that of all being in the world. When I move towards a world, I bury my perceptual and practical intentions in objects which ultimately appear prior to and external to those intentions, and which nevertheless exist for me only insofar as they arouse in me thoughts or volitions. In the case under consideration, the ambiguity of knowledge amounts to this. Our body comprises, as it were, 2 distinct layers, that of the habit body and that of the body at this moment."
Okay, this is dense. Let's unpack the first half. The paradox is that the world appears objectively ready-made and external to us, but we know it only exists for us, dependent on our consciousness. So we're simultaneously dependent on the world and constitutive of it.
It's the tension of being in the world. And the phantom limb is the perfect illustration of this tension because it forces us to separate the body into those 2 distinct layers he mentions.
Right, so the first layer, the body at this moment, is simple. It's the instantaneous, physical, objectified reality. The stump, the paralysis, the present physiological state. It's the body as an object.
But the habit body, That's everything else. It's the sedimentation of our past experiences, our acquired powers, our ingrained skills. It is the structure of our existence that remains committed to its projects. The ability to grasp, to write, to play an instrument, to run.
So the phantom limb exists because the habit body refuses to acknowledge the objective deficiency. The patient, who lost their hand 20 years ago, still feels the phantom arm because their existence, this complex system of equivalence that is their motor self, continues to project the practical field that included that arm.
Exactly. The utilizable world, the door handle, the cup, the pen, it all appeals to the hand they no longer have.
There's a key line here. The arm must have ceased to be a thing manipulatable for me now and become what one can manipulate in itself.
And that's it. The habit body remains open to all the actions of which the arm alone is capable. The missing limb is silent because it remains fully active as a potentiality. That is just an incredibly profound idea, that part of you fundamentally refuses to acknowledge its own loss.
It's a powerful philosophical metaphor for trauma or grief.
It is. The subjective experience of loss confirms the objective loss, but only because the body refuses to update its internal system of action. The phantom limb is a former present, a pattern of existence that hasn't yet receded into the past. It proves that our lived body is fundamentally a system of equivalence and a potentiality of volume tied to our intentions.
To make this philosophical point sticky, let's go back to that analogy we talked about before, the one about learning a complex instrument.
Right, specifically the classical organ.
An organ is a behemoth. Multiple keyboards or manuals, a huge range of foot pedals, scores of stops that control the timbre and voice. It's an enormous apparatus.
When an organist first learns, they have to use objective thought. They have to use intellectual localization. They calculate, my foot must go X distance to the left, and my right hand must reach Y distance to pull stop Z.
The instrument is external. Its parts, extra parts.
But the experienced organist, the virtuoso, they don't do this. When they're playing, the organ is no longer an external object. The entire complex instrument is incorporated into their motor being.
That entire space is absorbed into their body image.
Exactly. The organ's pedals and stops become immediate extensions of their motor potential. This seamless, non-intellectual skill is the habit body in action, a clear example of practognosia. The body understands the instrument's needs and structure without conscious thought or representation.
So now imagine a rare, specific stop on that organ, maybe one only used for a single, complex piece they played thousands of times, is suddenly removed for repair. Objectively, they know the stop is absent.
They've been told it's gone.
Right. But at that crucial moment in the performance, their hand still instinctively flies to that empty space. The habit body, the accumulated skilled structure of their musical existence, continues to express the intention for that sound.
The hand goes to the phantom stop. And that failure reveals the fundamental separation between the objective state, the missing mechanism, and the potentiality of action, the ingrained habit body.
The body is the vehicle of being in the world. And that vehicle carries its past potentials and intentions with it, even if the material equipment is lost. And this is what the case of patient Schneider illustrates in such excruciating detail.
The Schneider case study is Merleau-Ponty's ultimate empirical proof that movement is not reducible to a mechanical output of the brain. Schneider had an occipital injury, and he lost the ability to perform certain very specific types of movement.
He had this bizarre dichotomy, right? He could perform concrete tasks perfectly, like fetching a familiar tool or using his scissors to cut material for work. Those movements were fluent and precise.
They were successful because they were part of a familiar, real-world situation. He was absorbed in the world. The object, the scissors, the leather, it provided the background and structure for the action. His body was responding to the practical call of the objects themselves. They acted as poles of action that elicited movement by a sort of remote attraction.
It's movement that adheres to a given background.
Exactly. But if you asked him to perform an abstract task, say, point to the spot on your head I just touched, or trace a perfect circle in the air with your finger, he failed entirely. Or he had to resort to these agonizingly slow, roundabout routines. He could only succeed by turning the abstract task into a concrete one.
So if he had to trace a circle, he might move his finger around the rim of an imaginary object, forcing the abstract action to adhere to a fictional concrete background.
And that failure is philosophically essential. Abstract movements require you to dissociate your body from the actual world and possess a gratuitous and free spatial thought. They are centrifugal, they generate their own background, and exist in the realm of the virtual.
Merleau-Ponty uses two German terms to distinguish them, Greifen and Zeigen.
Right, Greifen is grasping. Schneider could grasp an object because the action was magically completed by anticipating its end within a practical, present field. It's movement driven by practignosia.
And Zeigen is pointing or designating. Schneider failed at this because pointing is an act of objectification. It requires you to treat your body and the object, the point on the wall, as parts of an objective geometric system that's detached from any immediate practical need.
It demands free spatial thought. Schneider's failure proved that movement is not just a thought translated into action. His core deficiency was the lack of motor intentionality, or the motor project, the Bewegungsentwurf, which is the body's innate power to anticipate and project the objective world as a motor possibility.
He could access the abstract thought, the cogitatio or blind movement, the res extensa, but he couldn't bridge the gap between them through the lived body.
And the normal person's movement bridges this gap seamlessly. We don't think and then move. Our movement is a spontaneous consciousness of movement. So the body is not a collection of anatomical parts in objective space, but a certain power of action within the framework of the anatomical apparatus.
So this ambiguity we found in the motor intentionality of the body, its status as both subject and object, it extends far beyond just movement and perception.
It does. Merleau-Ponty argues that this ambiguity is the hallmark of all human existence. He applies it to sexuality and to language, to show the foundational unity of our experience.
When we look at sexuality, objective theories, whether they're physiological or classical psychological, they try to reduce it to a peripheral bodily function, a hormonal reflex, or a purely mental affective state.
And Merleau-Ponty uses clinical data to show that, just like movement, sexuality is a total existential project. He looks at a specific case study of a patient with neurological impairment where sexual reactions were strictly localized and contact dependent.
So obscene pictures, conversation, the sight of a body, none of that aroused desire. The response was purely mechanical, tied only to specific physical stimulus.
And crucially, if physical contact was interrupted or if the partner moved away during intimacy, the half-fulfilled desire just vanished. The subject was left in a state of confusion. They did not know what is to be done next.
This is a failure to constitute an erotic world.
Exactly. The patient lacked the power of projecting before himself a sexual world or maintaining an erotic situation. The erotic is not an external stimulus causing an internal reflex. It is the body actively throwing itself into a possible future, a state of being in the world that is erotic.
So erotic perception isn't a cogitatio aimed at a representation, like just thinking about sex. It happens in the world. It is through one body it aims at another body and takes place in the world, not in a consciousness.
Just as my body grasps the object, Greifen, my body projects the sexual intentionality. This failure proves that the body structure is fundamental to desire. And this leads Merleau-Ponty to his profound conclusion about the universal ambiguity of existence.
Which is that sexuality is coextensive with life, creating a principle of indeterminacy.
Exactly. Everything in man, including our sexuality, is both a necessity, we have to have a body, we exist physically, and a contingency. How we live out that necessity is our own free, indeterminate choice.
So we can't just draw a line and say, this decision was 30% financial motivation and 70% subconscious sexual drive.
That's a false precision. That indeterminacy isn't a defect in our analysis. It's inherent in the structure of existence. Existence is the process by which the hitherto meaningless takes on meaning, transforming biological chance into reasoned transcendence.
The body, especially in these deep drives like sexuality, is the stage where the drama of human autonomy and dependence is perpetually lived out. It's where our freedom to project a future meets the biological necessity of our past and our physiology.
And if the body grounds perception and desire, it must also ground our most complex human activity, language.
Right. And Merleau-Ponty completely rejects the dualistic idea that thought exists fully formed, prior to language, and that words are just external labels pasted onto pre-existing ideas.
The dualistic view would claim that when I speak, I retrieve a word from some internal inventory and I attach it to a ready-made concept. Merleau-Ponty just reverses this. He says, the thinking subject himself is in a kind of ignorance of his thoughts, so long as he has not formulated them for himself.
The word, the physical act of expression, is the thought. The act of naming an object is the act of recognizing it. If thought were pure, non-spatial cogitatio, it would be entirely incommunicable and would, as he says, sink into the unconscious.
The key here is the link back to the body image and motility. Merleau-Ponty defines the word as a genuine gesture, containing its meaning in the same way a body gesture, like a shrug or the movement of a dancer, contains its meaning.
So we understand the word not by retrieving a fixed representation, but by synchronizing our existence with the style of being of the speaker.
This is a critical distinction from a purely objective communication model. When I read a philosophical text, I grasp the author's meaning by adopting their existential manner. By reproducing their tone and accent, I embody their intention. Communication is a synchronizing change of my own existence, a transformation of my being.
We can link this back to that organist analogy. When the typist incorporates the keyboard into their body image, the physical gesture of striking the key is the expression of the thought.
Similarly, the phonetic gesture of the word is the token, or the body, of the thought itself. And to properly understand this, we have to distinguish between two forms of language activity that reflect this ambiguity of the body.
Okay, what are they?
The speaking word is primary. This is authentic expression, the moment that significance is created when the intention is at the stage of coming into being. It is the spontaneous act of meaning-giving.
And the spoken word is secondary. This is the constituted systems of vocabulary and syntax, the residue and repository of all those previous acts of expression. It's the fixed dictionary and grammar we rely on every day.
And this reflects the fundamental movement of existence. We create structure, the speaking word, or a new habit body like learning the organ, and then we rely on that sedimentation, the spoken word or the established habit.
The body's ability to appropriate external instruments, like the blind man's stick becoming an extension of his touch, or the typist's keyboard becoming an extension of their thought, is the exact same power that allows us to appropriate the phonetic gesture of language and create meaning.
The body is the general medium for having a world, whether that world is made of visible objects, graspable tools, erotic situations, or communicative symbols. The union of body and mind is enacted through this ability to move, speak, and desire, simultaneously creating structure and relying on it. The function of Merleau-Ponty's body is to endow the instantaneous expressions of spontaneity with a little renewable action and independent existence.
And that's what allows us to escape the instant and build a stable, meaningful world.
So we began this deep dive into Merleau-Ponty by seeking to unify the subject and the object, the psychic and the physiological. And we found that unity not in some abstract location, but in the thoroughly ambiguous nature of the body.
Right. The body is simultaneously a thing that can be studied and dissected, and the indispensable medium through which we grasp all things, the subjective origin of our world.
It is neither wholly objective nor wholly subjective, but perpetually being in the world.
Merleau-Ponty forces us to recognize that our connection to reality, to space, to time, to other people, it isn't primarily cognitive or intellectual. It's physical and practical from the very start.
The body is not merely one object among the rest in the universe. It is, as he insists, the hidden form of being ourself.
And by establishing existence itself as this ambiguous foundational concept, he collapses the traditional stale categories of psychology, physiology, and philosophy into a single, concrete, lived reality.
And the most challenging takeaway, I think, as we saw with sexuality and the phantom limb, is the concept of indeterminacy. Our body is both a source of freedom, allowing us the possibility of projection and transcendence, the power to create meaning, and a source of servitude tied to the anonymity of our pre-personal past, our physiological necessities, and the weight of our acquired habits.
So Merleau-Ponty's ultimate challenge is to our perceived certainty. If he's correct that we live in a world where everything we live or think has always several meanings, and that existence is indeterminate in itself, what does that mean for your own sense of certainty? Can you truly ever isolate and know the difference between what you are by nature, your biological necessity, and what you have chosen to be, your existential transcendence? Is the choice you make right now dictated by your freedom, or is it merely the inevitable expression of your deepest, most ingrained habit body? That's a question worth inhabiting.